Hello and welcome to an almost deserted Stansted Airport just outside London. We're here to find out what the airlines and airports are planning to do to keep us safe when we do start thinking about foreign holidays again. Also, coming up this week, we meet the New York cabbie who's continued working throughout the lockdown. We head to Cambodia to see the temple complex and tourist hotspot at Angkor Wat totally deserted. And we discover why some of history's greatest minds thought that the very best way to travel was to stay at home. Now, here at Stansted, there are normally 500 flights coming in and out every day. Today, there are only 9. But flight numbers from the UK could be slowly picking up again. British Airways and Ryanair have recently both announced plans to schedule up to 50% of their usual flight capacity from the beginning of July. Though they say normal scheduling isn't likely to return until 2023.
Of course, this is not going to be a normal summer, not for any of us.
Meanwhile, local travel restrictions are easing, and some governments are even planning to open their borders to citizens of neighbouring countries, creating so-called travel bubbles.
The whole purpose of us discussing the possibility of having a bubble of sorts between us, a safe zone of travel, would be so that you wouldn't have to have a quarantine attached. I think everyone would acknowledge that it would be prohibitive.
Safety, that underlies our guidance. And that means taking gradual, careful steps to help travel restart in line with what science tells us.
Those bubbles are one way of kick-starting travel again. But when we do begin to fly, can we trust that airlines are doing enough to keep us safe? So here at Stansted, they're using all the space to enforce social distancing. There are stickers on the ground to make sure you stand in the right place. And when it comes to masks and gloves, well, they're not compulsory, but they are very much advised. I think you get your hands cleaned first. Thank you very much. Then you get the mask. Thank you. Which you then put on around your ears. And then the gloves. And you can even get your temperature scanned before you get to security. Well, that all seems pretty straightforward and simple when you've only got 9 flights a day. But how easy would it be to maintain when there are many more passengers and many more flights? And also, when you actually get on the plane, how safe will that be? This week, the International Air Transport Association announced a series of measures the industry should be taking to keep passengers and crew safe. Etihad, based in Abu Dhabi, is just one of the airlines already taking action to try to reassure passengers. They're currently trialling technology that allows them to monitor passengers' heart rate, temperature and respiratory rate, with the potential to detect COVID-19.
We've embarked on a huge sort of sanitisation program. What we're doing is actively encouraging people to check in online. It's all about limiting the touch points throughout the traveller's journey.
I just want to ask you about the middle seat, because there seems to be some debate about that. I mean, does it actually make any difference?
It's difficult to achieve the 2-metre distancing, but for example, in economy, what we're doing is ensuring that the neighbouring seat is free. All of our aircraft have HEPA air filters, which basically filter 99% of airborne microbes. So effectively, the air quality on an aircraft is equivalent to what you're getting in a hospital operating theatre. To be unable to use an aircraft's full capacity, it's not economically sustainable long term. The only way I suppose you could counter this would be to double airfares, and of course that's not viable. You would hope that the wearing of face masks, as well as the many other measures, that's going to be sufficient, because it's impossible to maintain social distancing on an aircraft.
Etihad is not alone in its efforts. Delta will be spraying its cabins with a special disinfectant between every flight. The spray is electrostatically charged to ensure no surface goes untouched. And Hong Kong Airport has introduced decontamination tanks. The claim is that they'll kill any viruses or bacteria on your clothes or exposed parts of your body in only 40 seconds. But it's not just tech that could be seeing us through this crisis. Medical detection dogs may soon be in place at airports like this in an effort to literally sniff out passengers with COVID.
So this is Asher. He's one of the rescue dogs that is going to be helping in the fight against COVID-19. Now, he's got 350 million sensory receptors in that nose. Us poor humans have got 5 million. Now, that nose is going to be put to good use and is really going to save many, many lives.
Volunteers who've tested positive for COVID-19 are given special socks to wear. The socks capture the odour of the virus, which is then used to train the dogs.
We're hoping that the dog will be able to make a good detection without becoming closer than 1 metre from the individuals. But, this is going to be quite smelly. If there's an odour, this is a person, they're going to be shedding these odours and the dog will pick it up quickly. We're working probably at an airport like Heathrow, where flights are coming in, perhaps from areas of the world where we know there's a current hotspot. So the dogs will be able to detect very rapidly. It takes 0.5 of a second for a dog to sniff someone and make a detection.
Well, let's find out what our global guru Simon Calder makes of the situation. Hi, Simon. Let's face it, it's going to be a long time before most of us are flying again, isn't it?
That all depends who you talk to, actually, because you have, for example, middle of May, Lufthansa suddenly came out and said, right, we are going to be flying a really quite significant network from the 1st of June. You've had, obviously, Ryanair, the biggest budget airline in Europe, saying they will be doing pretty much the same from the start of July. And it's a question of which airlines are flying where and, most crucially, of course, as we've been hearing, what sort of restrictions are in place, not just for the airlines, but crucially for their passengers.
I just want to clear up a couple of things that people have said, which is, number one, by getting rid of the middle seat on a plane, you are making it safer. And number two, actually flying on a plane is safer because the air is circulated, and so we shouldn't worry about that anyway. What do you say to that?
If you take the middle seat out on an aircraft, then you can reduce the distance between passengers from maybe 50 centimetres to 1 metre. A lot of people would say that in the course of a 3-hour flight, that's actually not going to make much difference, but it would certainly make a lot of difference to the fare if you take out 1/3 of the passengers. The cruelty of fractions means that you need to increase the price by 50%. And in terms of the way that the air circulates on aircraft, yes, they do have very high quality air filters up to kind of operating theatre standards. But if somebody next to you is sneezing and coughing, I'm afraid the best filters in the world aren't going to do you much good.
The other thing, of course, is that whilst these things are all starting and people are trying to be induced into flying, if you like, there will be some nice, good deals, I suspect. But in the long run, will it make flying prohibitively expensive?
There are certainly, of course, going to be some increased costs. If you're a low-cost airline and you've got to clean out the aircraft really thoroughly after a 2-hour flight, that's going to add to your turns. It's going to reduce the time that the aircraft is in the air. It's going effectively to undermine a lot of your business model. Extra costs at airports, of course, are going to push prices up. But against that, you are going to see the airlines, the holiday companies coming in with all sorts of deals to persuade us that, yes, it is a good idea to go travelling once again. And so, as it were, for the brave, maybe for the foolhardy, there will be plenty of bargains out there. But I think when things settle down, we won't see quite as many flights. We won't see the same range of opportunities that we have now, and we will certainly see higher prices, because the only way that the airlines can recoup the billions of dollars that they've been losing over the past few months is, of course, to push up the prices, and they'll do that by keeping a lid on capacity.
Thank you, Simon. Stay safe. Well, let's cross the Atlantic now and speak to another familiar face here on The Travel Show, because Mike Corrie has been at home in lockdown in eastern Canada. Hello, Mike.
Hey, Rajan. How are you?
Fine. Tell me, how severe have the restrictions been there where you are?
Things are different province to province. So my province, New Brunswick, on the East Coast, we've only had about 100 or so cases. So we are taking it seriously, but we're slowly opening some things back up. For example, parks have now been opened locally, and we can gather in groups of only 10 as long as we're outside and still retain social distancing measures.
But really, you must be itching to get on the road again and to travel abroad. I mean, what's on your list for the places you want to go next?
Right. I had plans to go to Peru, and of course, those are now on hold. But that's where I'm itching to go as soon as I can. I've got to find myself in a jungle sometime soon.
But it does give you a chance to explore your homeland, Canada, more. You going to do that?
Yeah, definitely. So my province, New Brunswick, I haven't spent too much time here, obviously, the past few years. I'm always traveling. But there's, for example, there's the highest tides in the world, the Bay of Fundy. 15 meters of vertical water, if you can imagine, goes up and down twice a day. And I think as soon as I can, I'll be out there maybe getting my feet muddy in the ocean.
I wish I was there too.
Well, we're going to stay on this side of the ocean for a moment and find out how New York's famous yellow taxi cabs are dealing with deserted streets and no passengers.
We don't have a need to declare ourselves an independent state. We are an independent country.
The DNA of Indonesian society is tolerance, moderate. That is what I see.
Well, I think it's very important that we have people from different backgrounds, different generations, and different genders in places of power.
How we've been affecting the climate? We have. We know that perfectly well.
When big names talk, they talk to the BBC.
I'm here at this hospital where they're already experiencing the benefits of AI.
The new tool to reboot democracy and find common ground amongst the most polarised of views.
This is a very innovative project to protect the environment.
The Take on Tech. Click on BBC World News.
Next up, we're in New York, where lockdown's supposed to last until at least mid-June. It's had a crippling effect on one of America's biggest cities. In particular, its iconic yellow taxis are having a really rough time. Many can't find work, others are struggling just to drive safely. Here's what life looks like for just one of them.
See how empty the city is. My name is Ricardo Rosillo. I've been a New York City cab driver for 15 years. Ever since the lockdown, business has been slowing down, and it has affected us cab drivers because normally we usually make around 30 rides a day, and now we could only make around 10 rides per day. So this right here is the heart of Times Square. Yeah, so this is one of the busiest places in Manhattan, and as you can see, it's completely empty. You know, they got thousands and thousands of people here. It's crazy how, because of the virus, it has affected our jobs and it has affected everybody. The only reason that I'm out here is because I'm a little bit younger than other cab drivers, so that makes a big difference. I've heard that a lot of cab drivers have passed away, you know, because they're on their mid-50s. So I think that most of the cab drivers that are out here now in New York are mostly young, in their 30s or, you know, 40s, and they feel more secure. A couple of friends of mine have passed away. I was afraid of getting infected and infecting others, you know, my family members or friends. But, you know, I needed to make a living. I have sanitation products and alcohol. I always wipe down the seats after I pick up a passenger. So this right here is Park Avenue. Before the quarantine, you should see at this time, at 3 in the afternoon, there's a lot of people hailing cabs, people coming out from work, kids getting out from school. Most of the passengers that I pick up now are nurses, doctors, essential workers, basically. So there was this one lady that was very generous to me. She had the courtesy to give me $50 just for going less than 3 blocks. She was surprised that I picked her up. Nobody had picked her up for at least 30 minutes because she looked elderly and they thought she would have the virus. People feel that as an essential worker, I should deserve a better tip, so they've been really generous to me that way.
Now, lockdowns remain firmly in place in some countries, but are beginning to ease in others. It's been amazing to see some of the creative ways people have been getting used to their reduced circumstances, and some taking a new, more philosophical view of travel. In Berlin, for instance, local group Windowflix are projecting films for people living in apartment blocks to enjoy. Berliners from all over the city can apply online for a viewing. Ecuador, Baghdad, London, and New York have all seen musicians serenade their neighborhoods. In some places, it's become a regular fixture. Even cartography has a place in this. The urban design site City Labs has been asking people to send in personal maps showing their new, limited horizons.
Since the beginning of April, we've been running a project where we're inviting readers to send in maps of how their worlds have changed under quarantine. They're using this extraordinary moment as a chance to explore their own homes and neighborhoods and communities in ways that are fresh in some ways. I mean, despite how like gratingly familiar our quarantine lives feel a lot of the time.
Maps are really strange objects. We think that they're just representations of the world, but actually they're very much showing what we want to represent. So a map of a town might include all the castles, and it doesn't include all the council estates. So when people go off and make maps, the really nice thing about that is that they are highlighting the bits of the world that they think are important.
And I think the process of actually making a map, of sitting down and drawing, portraying a place that's important to you, or that you have some thoughts or feelings about, it really amplifies that whole experience and kind of forces you to sort through what you're seeing, hearing, thinking, feeling, and even desiring about a place.
Whenever we travel to a place, we travel at a certain time. New York in 1920 is very different to New York in 2020. And I think imagining how New York is going to be in 2021 could actually be really helpful. It will help us put ourselves in other people's shoes, take ourselves out of our own particular lockdowns, and imagine what the world more generally is going through and what it's going to be like at the end of this. There's quite a lot of evidence in different fields to show that the more you know about something, the more you enjoy it. The philosophers Socrates and Immanuel Kant both argued it's actually better to read books about a place if you want to learn about it, rather than going off. So Kant has this famous saying where he argues, I don't have time to travel, I want to know too much about the world. And then you could just picture him sitting at home in his armchair, surrounded by travel books. And that was his way of doing it.
Now, if you've ever been to Cambodia, chances are that you will have dropped in on Angkor Wat. It's the world's largest religious site. A vast ancient Buddhist temple complex that attracts 2.5 million people every single year. That means it's rarely empty. Crowds get there early to see the sunrise and stay for days, spending plenty of money in that part of the country as a result. But of course, coronavirus has had an impact. Income from tourism has dropped more than 99% since 2019.
The Angkor Wat temple, it really shows the peak of architectural and engineering skill, of our ancestor. We even put it in the national flag of Cambodia as well. As you could see around ourselves, do we see any tourists? I feel quite sad, I have not come to this temple for now 40 days. I really miss those days, that I brought people to here, We got to deal a lot with our life situation at the moment. So many people lost jobs. Of course, we have had some crises before, but nothing was ever bigger than this. So this is like the hardest hit ever.
ហើយយើងការលក់ដូររបស់យើងក៏យើងលក់ដាច់ហើយជាពិសេសភ្ញៀវទេសចរក៏គាត់ចូលមកច្រើនទៅពេលចឹងទៅវាមានបញ្ហាប៉ះពាល់ច្រើនដោយសារវាមានជំងឺ COVID-19 មកធ្វើឲ្យយើងធ្លាក់សេដ្ឋកិច្ចធ្លាក់ចុះធ្វើឲ្យយើងការលក់ដូររបស់យើងហ្នឹងអត់ល្អប្រសើរដូចកាលពីមុនទេបង
So far, Cambodia has reported fewer than 150 cases of coronavirus. But the crash in international tourism has badly affected the local economy. In nearby Siem Reap, many businesses are closed.
Here's the Sajas. It is the most well-known market in the city where tourists would come for shopping, for wood carving, t-shirt, silver, silk. Yeah, normally these stores are opening, but at the moment every store is closed.
Back at the temple, some work has been able to continue.
We use mortar, so that the water, when they flow, they cannot go inside, not in the stone.
And fewer sightseers have actually made the job of some conservationists a little bit easier.
Especially it's good for when we are transport the scaffolding from that tower to this tower. So before the COVID coming, so the people when they want to go up to the temple, they had to wait for the queue. But now it's okay, not mandatory. We can go, we can remove anywhere, anytime.
Site managers are also working on a new bicycle trail and a new welcome area. But many of these projects rely on income generated from ticket sales. For the people whose livelihoods depend on tourism, the end of the crisis can't come soon enough.
Of course, that we pray that the coronavirus will be vanished from our planet soon so that people can come once again.
And a massive thank you to everyone who spoke to us today at Angkor Wat. I really and truly hope that tourism returns to Cambodia as soon as it possibly can.
Thanks, Mike. Take care. That's it for this week. We'll be back in a few weeks' time with a brand new show. But until then, take care, stay safe, and goodbye.
Hello. The recent record-breaking heat we've seen across parts of southeast Europe is now diminishing. We'll take a look at Europe in a moment. First off, to North America. And we've got some fairly stormy conditions developing through parts of the Midwest, the plains, down towards Texas and Oklahoma. We've got some heavy downpours and some severe thunderstorms possible at times. They'll be shifting their way gradually eastwards over the coming day or so. Still a few heavy showers for parts of the Carolinas and Virginia, but things are looking drier for the next few days in Michigan. Still unsettled for the Pacific Northwest and Western Canada with further outbreaks of rain and mountain snow, but down towards the desert southwest, things are still remaining dry. Temperatures in the west will be on the rise. Much of Mexico looks dry, but we have got a few showers around parts of the Bay of Campeche, the Yucatan Peninsula too. Heavier downpours further south affecting Honduras, Guatemala as well, and some scattered heavy showers and thunderstorms across the Caribbean. For South America on Friday, we've got this line of heavy rainfall through central parts of the continent, particularly heavy downpours across parts of Uruguay, Paraguay and the far south of Brazil as well, and some heavy showers for Colombia and Venezuela. Now, across Europe, that record-breaking heat we've seen recently is getting pushed away. We've got colder air moving in. Some heavy rainfall across parts of southern France, across the Alps, towards central Germany too. To the north of that, blustery conditions up towards the UK and Scandinavia. Still drier towards Turkey, but certainly not as hot as it has been. And the slightly cooler weather continues as well across parts of North Africa. So for Libya and for Egypt, a northerly breeze brings cooler conditions here. Still pretty hot for the time of year, though, across parts of Morocco. And that heat across the Levant, not quite as intense as it has been. 1 or 2 showers, in fact, moving into parts of Israel up towards Syria at times, but they're fairly few and far between. A lot of hot weather across the Middle East. And we've still got heavy rainfall from the remnants of ex-cyclone Amphan affecting parts of Bangladesh, northern India and into eastern Nepal as well. So there could be some flooding there. Elsewhere across India, a lot of fairly hot and dry weather with just a few showers down towards Goa and Kerala too. A line of heavy rain is going to persist across parts of southern China towards Taiwan over the next few days as well. So some downpours likely here. To the north of that, a few showers across parts of Japan and the Korean Peninsula as well, but some sunnier, dry weather in between. Largely warm and dry for the likes of Beijing down towards Shanghai, but then we've got that wet weather sitting close to Hong Kong. To the south of that, some heavy showers starting to develop across parts of Vietnam into Thailand and across Indonesia. It's a story of sunny spells and scattered showers. Now, we do have another cyclone sitting well out to the west of Western Australia, but that is going to move close to the coast of Western Australia later on Sunday and into Monday, bringing some destructive winds and big waves as well. Also heavy rain for parts of Queensland and blustery conditions across New South Wales. That's it for now. Bye-bye.
They say traitor. We say divisive, unpopular, controversial, defiant. They report what she did. We're on to why she did it. They get caught up in the story. We see the big picture. When they rush to conclusions, we rush to the scene. It's black and white, they say. It's never black and white. BBC News. Find out what's actually happening.
This is BBC World News America. Reporting from New York City, I'm Neda Tawfiq. Patrolling the outbreak in Brazil, authorities try to contain the coronavirus as coastal communities fear they could be on the front lines. Political unrest in Hong Kong as lawmakers push back against China's new security law proposal. The U.S. Secretary of State has condemned the measure. President Trump says houses of worship are essential and must reopen now. That's despite limits on large gatherings across much of the country. Plus, the king is alive and well, but the city of Las Vegas is on life support as tourists stay away from the gambling hotspot.
Without the people, there is no party. And the economic impact of this eerily quiet and empty strip is rippling across the city.
For all of you watching on PBS and around the globe, welcome to World News America. This week has seen a shocking rise in infections and deaths in parts of the world, even as many other nations move to reopen their economies. Here in the United States, flags will fly at half-staff this Memorial Day weekend to honor the victims of the deadly virus. But we'll start in Brazil, where the death toll has jumped above 20,000 for the first time. The governor of the worst affected state has moved up the public holidays in an attempt to stop people from going to work. But that has raised concerns among Brazil's coastal communities, as Katie Watson reports.
Beaches are medicine for the Brazilian soul.
even if breathing that fresh sea air is a little harder these days. Hanging out on this beach is definitely not allowed. Neither's surfing, unless it's first thing in the morning. But then rules here are regularly broken.
I'm not at the beach. I came by bike, I took my board and I went to the sea. The beach is just a place I have to go to get to the sea.
The police are out, but they're not doing much. This weekend, they've got bigger things to worry about. Ejecting tourists who've come down to the coast from the big city. And it's making locals nervous. We're afraid, this man tells me. Sao Paulo's a city with lots of the virus. A sunny day like this, the beach would be full. Communities have put up roadblocks to try and stop the exodus. They're worried that the decision by the state governor to make this a long weekend will threaten the communities here.
There's a greater flow of people who are not staying at home. They're coming and we're trying to make these people aware, telling them our cities are closed, our hotels are shut, as are the beaches. So we advise them to go back home.
A short while ago, they stopped operating the barrier because the traffic was building up and ambulances couldn't come through. It's not a fail-safe system at a time when Brazilians are clearly struggling with social distancing measures and the numbers of infections and the death toll keep going up.
No. Further along the coast, some beach towns blocked the road in protest ahead of the public holiday. On the beaches, they made their point clear, that quarantine is not an excuse for a weekend break. Stay away and save lives. Doctors working on the coast say their intensive care units are close to capacity, and an influx of tourists could push them over the edge.
We're very afraid about all the people that in weekends and holidays can think to came to the beach. It's a problem. In normal time, we have problem with this. We have 2 times or 3 times the population in some cities around here. In this kind of situation, we're very afraid about that.
The government of Sao Paulo is desperately trying to find new ways to make people stay at home, with little effect. And the crisis here just keeps on getting worse. Katie Watson, BBC News in Sao Paulo State.
Meanwhile, the United States is heading into the long Memorial Day weekend, which is considered the unofficial start of summer. Of course, this will be a season unlike any other, and here to discuss that is Dr. William Schaffner, professor of preventative medicine at the Vanderbilt University School of Medicine. Thank you so much for being with us. You know, the CDC says that 35% of those with COVID show no symptoms, and that 40% of transmissions happen before people even start feeling sick. So given that, what would you tell Americans about how they can stay safe going into the Memorial Day weekend?
Well, now I would tell them they can stay safer. I don't know if they can stay completely safe, but do everything cautiously. Use those masks, a lot of good hand hygiene, and obey the 6-foot rule. Stay 6 feet away from other people. Avoid congregate locations. Bars, for example. If you go to a restaurant, make sure the tables are spread far apart. And frankly, on this weekend, be very cautious about religious services because you congregate in the congregation and people come close together again. And many of those people are older. They have underlying illnesses. They're more likely to get severe disease if they do get infected. So I urge enjoying the weekend, but with great caution.
We're also getting some guidance about one of the treatments that President Trump himself has used, hydrochloroquine. A study in The Lancet said that those who used hydrochloroquine were more likely to die and have heart issues. I wonder what you took away from that study.
Well, this latest study in The Lancet was a very large kind of global study in which the authors gathered data from all around the world. And it is a retrospective study, not prospective, so it has some limitations. But it clearly showed that hydroxychloroquine, chloroquine, plus or minus antibiotics had no advantage over no treatment and actually put patients at increased risk of dangerous heart rhythm disturbances. So it's adding to the information that hydroxychloroquine is not at all what it was first touted to be.
So at this point, should hospitals be using this, should people be using this as a prophylactic?
Well, as a prophylactic, there's absolutely no information about that. In fact, there's a monkey study that shows that hydroxychloroquine did not prevent the infection. There are still opportunities for patients to enroll in studies if they wish to do that. But my understanding is those studies are having a hard time enrolling patients because the information is coming out that it's dubious that hydroxychloroquine has much, if any, beneficial effect.
You know, there was also a warning today by the WHO and UNICEF that routine immunization programs were being disrupted by the coronavirus. Do you think the fight against the coronavirus is possibly coming at the expense of fighting some of these other diseases?
Oh, Nada, that's a real problem. Patients, mothers and fathers, are not bringing their children in for routine immunizations. And so the baby shots and the shots that young children are getting are dropping off, which means that there are more children potentially susceptible to these infections. And if they were to be imported into the United States, we could have another, for example, measles outbreak. That would be horrific. So pediatricians and family doctors are reaching out to patients to get them in vaccinated safely.
Absolutely. Dr. Schaffner, thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Now, President Trump has put houses of worship at the center of the conversation about reopening the country. Speaking at the White House this afternoon, Mr. Trump said that churches, mosques, and synagogues should be considered essential and allowed to reopen right now.
The governors need to do the right thing and allow these very important, essential places of faith to open right now for this weekend. If they don't do it, I will override the governors. In America, we need more prayer, not less.
Well, for more on that, I'm joined by Ron Christie, former advisor to George W. Bush and a BBC analyst. So, Ron, we heard President Trump there saying he will order the governors to open the religious institutions, but he doesn't really have the authority to do that, does he?
Good evening to you, Netta. No, he does not. As a lawyer and frankly, as one who consulted with the former U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, we had a conversation earlier this afternoon, and I said, can the president really force the governors to act this way? And the answer was no. We have the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution, and the 10th Amendment says that those powers that aren't specifically delineated must go to the states. So if a governor, if a legislature has decided what is essential and what is not essential, the President of the United States does not have the constitutional or legal authority to overrule those actions by those governors.
I mean, there's been a big back and forth between the president and governors about who's responsible for reopening. I mean, this is clearly not an issue about First Amendment, as the president has said. It's more of a political maneuver, isn't it?
100%. Look, what the president's trying to do here is to reassure his base and say, you know what, some of these blue state governors, the governors of, say, California or Massachusetts, or some of these other areas where the president doesn't feel that his base is really thinking that he's reaching out to them, the president wants to make a very political statement and say, I've got your back. Let's go to church, let's go to worship, and I'm going to overrule these governors. But once again, Netta, from my reading the Constitution, for being a lawyer, I can tell you he does not have the legal authority to act in that manner, as he said earlier today.
And Ron, what do you make of the timing of this? Because we see that the president's poll numbers are taking a massive hit.
They are taking a massive hit. And certainly I can remember back to 2004 when I worked for President Bush, and we were sitting in the White House and we were looking at our numbers cratering. The president was very unpopular with the war in Iraq, a war in Afghanistan, and he wanted to go out there and find a way, find a path to re-election. And I think what you're seeing with President Trump right now in 2020 is something very similar. They're reading the polls very carefully, very closely in the White House, and they're saying, what can we do to turn things around? And I think what you saw today was, as it relates to houses of worship, the president's trying to get his base to come back to him.
Well, the presumptive Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, has made waves today in a radio interview. He actually made a comment saying that black voters torn between President Trump and himself ain't black. Now, as a Republican strategist, I wonder how something like that will play into this election and possibly how that will affect Joe Biden's campaign.
I can assure you that between now and November, we are going to hear that clip played again and again and again. It plays into the notion that if you're black and that you are conservative and that you are a Republican, that somehow you're not authentic, you're not true to your race. And Joe Biden in the basement in Wilmington, Delaware, did one of those things that his staff, the minute that he said that, Netta, were thinking to themselves, oh my goodness, how can we walk this back? How can we talk this back? How can the vice president apologize for a patently racist set of remarks? And unfortunately, I think the Republicans are going to pounce on this. They're going to jump on this. And this is going to be a bigger headache and, frankly, an albatross around the vice president's neck in the days and weeks and months to come.
All right, Ron Christie, you'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much, as always.
Nice to see you.
Now, there's been strong condemnations against China's plan to introduce a new security law for Hong Kong. The U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has called it a death knell for the city's freedoms, and Britain, Australia, and Canada issued a joint statement which said that such measures would undermine the principle of one country, two systems. The law was submitted at the annual National People's Congress, which has just gotten underway in Beijing. Robin Brandt has more.
Hong Kong has seen a lot of protest in the last year. Today, more. This time, it was some of the city's lawmakers. They fear that wide-ranging new security laws imposed by their ultimate rulers in Beijing will be fatal to their freedoms. Those rulers, led by this man, President Xi Jinping, watched as millions in Hong Kong rebelled last year. Now, months later, despite another disaster on their hands, they've moved decisively.
We will fully and faithfully implement the policy of one country, two systems, under which the people of Hong Kong govern Hong Kong with a high degree of autonomy. We will establish sound legal systems and enforcement mechanisms for safeguarding national security.
Protesters in the future could face charges of subversion, sedition, terrorism, even aiding foreign interference. And Hong Kong's elected lawmakers will be bypassed if, as expected, this is simply imposed. China has no shortage of great cities, but what sets Hong Kong apart from the rest isn't just its different money, its different police and its different court system, it's the autonomy it has, the right to pretty much rule itself day to day. Some people in Hong Kong say if you lose that, they will lose their Hong Kong. Beijing, though, sees a different sort of ending. China's leaders think Hong Kong's autonomy caused this. Thousands were arrested last year during months of demonstrations. Protesters paralysed parts of the city. They believe their special status is being eroded by an authoritarian regime. Hong Kong is calmer now, but further protests are very likely. Protests that Beijing openly regards as a threat to China's integrity. Robin Brandt, BBC News, Shanghai.
You're watching BBC World News America. Still to come on tonight's program. A plane crash in Pakistan has left dozens dead after the pilot reported a loss of engine power. Nearly 100 were on board. Some amazingly survived. Parts of India and Bangladesh are cleaning up after Cyclone Umpun. At least 105 people have been killed and thousands of homes destroyed. Divya Arya reports.
For those on the ground, it's a struggle to salvage whatever has been left behind. The coronavirus lockdown across the country is making things even harder.
My home was wrecked in the cyclone. A tree fell on it. Everything is destroyed. Where will we stay? Due to the lockdown, everything is closed. There is no work and no income.
Rebuilding has already begun. especially in low-lying areas where the destruction has been severe. In neighboring Bangladesh, aid agencies are trying to provide aid to Rohingya refugees. The challenge compounded by COVID-19. The first cases recently detected here, the largest refugee camp in the world.
At least 80 people are confirmed to have died when a plane crashed into a crowded residential area in the Pakistani city of Karachi. But officials say that number could still rise. There were a total of 99 people on board the Airbus A320 when it came down just before landing. Remarkably, at least 2 people have survived. Our Pakistan correspondent, Sekunder Kermani, has the latest.
These are the moments just before the plane crashed to the ground. At the site, panic and chaos. This residential area is just a short distance away from the airport. Rescue workers combed through the debris looking for surviving passengers and injured locals. This man, head of a major bank, was pulled out from the wreckage alive. But other families have been left distraught.
We pulled out a small child and his mother. They're both alive. Then we found 2 dead bodies on top of the building. There might be a few more bodies up there, with the rest under the plane, but we just don't know yet.
The Muslim festival of Eid is this weekend, and many of those travelling would have been hoping to celebrate with loved ones. Karachi's health workers were already stretched dealing with coronavirus. The city has been the epicenter of the country's outbreak. Now, a state of emergency has been declared in all major hospitals. The head of the airline said in the pilot's last communications he described a technical problem. They're now investigating what happened. There will be questions for airline authorities. There have been other crashes in the past too. But first, for dozens of families, instead of Eid festivities, there'll be funerals. Sekunder Kermani, BBC News.
Terrifying for those survivors waking up in the wreckage like that. Now, many people have had to put their dream vacations on hold, or any vacation for that matter. And so it'll take some time before tourism returns to many parts of the world. For some destinations, that will hurt more than others. Take Las Vegas, for example. Before the outbreak, it was one of the most vibrant economies in the world. Now, the city's famous strip is dimmed, resembling a ghost town, as the BBC's Sophie Long reports.
The party that once raged here is over. The big question is, will revelers ever roll back into town? Tourism is to Las Vegas what the automotive industry is to Detroit, what music is to Nashville, government to Washington, D.C. Without it, without the people, there is no party. And the economic impact of this eerily quiet and empty strip is rippling across the city.
At the peak of the Great Recession, our unemployment rate in Southern Nevada was about 13 to 14%, very high by historical standards. As you and I sit here today, that unemployment rate is roughly 30%. So even if we bring 2/3 of those employees back online, we are going to have an unemployment rate that is substantially higher than we've seen historically.
The global pandemic has completely cleared the entertainment capital of the world. New York, New York. Paris, the Venetian, 160,000 hotel rooms, almost all of them empty.
I love what I do. So when you love what you do or what you work, I make you happy.
Gladys is a housekeeper at the Bellagio.
I hope you're not going to back. When? I don't know, but I hope I go back.
Would you feel safe going back to work?
That's what we're working, like the union being asking, you know, to the companies to do a guideline so they can do the things to protect us when we go back to work.
People here are conflicted. They're desperate to return to work, but they're scared to do so. Not everyone will get the chance. This casino would normally be full of more than 4,000 people, and the sounds of the 800 slot machines spitting out coins, the clickety-clack of roulette wheels spinning. But now, all you can hear is the air conditioning system. And the problem is that even when casinos are allowed to reopen their doors, until tourists feel safe enough to board planes in order to walk through them, they will remain varying degrees of empty.
Nobody's ever been through this before. So we have all these analysts and stuff saying it's going to take 1.5 years to 2 years to recover, but this has never happened. But yeah, quite honestly, yeah, probably 30% of those people could lose their jobs permanently.
Las Vegas is starting to reopen. There are already scenes reminiscent of the lives we used to live, and further preparations are underway.
You can see the lights are on, we're testing, right? We're making sure that everything's operable or operating. We're testing new equipment. We're going to be fogging the area every day, almost like Ghostbusters style, with disinfectant. And our staff, we're preparing and training our staff to wear PPE to make sure that they're all safe.
It's tight, but we're still in business.
Elvis impersonators are squeezing back into their jumpsuits.
Let's rock and roll.
And are ready to follow the new rules, aware that only fools rush in.
I'm normally very, you walk in, shake where you're from. Sometimes a bride, Elvis, I love you, could I give you a hug? So to have that standoff now that we have to do with people, it's going to be, that's sad. But you have to still do it with a smile and make them feel. And congratulations then, hats off for saying, hey, you're open, we're on our way, we're coming in. So like to that, these first couples, what a great thing. They're like, we want to get married, we love each other. So we're here to rock their world and celebrate and lift them up and say, good for you.
Irene and Douglas, the first couple to offer living proof that the coronavirus can't conquer love. Sophie Long, BBC News, Las Vegas.
You're married.
Love that apt advice from Elvis in dealing with corona. Only fools rush in. Now, before we go, Rolling Thunders was an annual event each Memorial Day weekend. Thousands of bikers would descend on Washington, D.C. to bring attention to service members who went missing in action. Now, this year's event is scaled down and renamed, but still loud. President Trump held a Rolling to Remember event at the White House today. Motorcyclists got the chance to cruise around the South Lawn and rattle the windows a bit. Bikers are urged to ride 22 miles in their home communities to raise awareness about veteran suicide. About 20 veterans take their lives each day. So that message heard loud and clear there at the White House. Well, remember, you can find more on all the day's news at our website. Plus, to see what we're working on at any time, make sure to check us out on Twitter. I'm Neda Tawfiq. Thank you for watching World News America.
Hello there. Cyclone Manga has formed in the Indian Ocean. It'll be heading close to Western Australia later in the weekend and on into Monday. You can see that storm system here on the satellite image. Meanwhile, we've also got a lot of clouds heading across parts of southern China and into Taiwan as well. This is a slow-moving, almost stationary front, which is going to bring a lot of rain over the next few days. To the north of that, for much of Japan and the Korean Peninsula, it's going to be a story of sunny spells and a few scattered showers, mostly dry in Beijing. It'll be warming up here, in fact, over the next few days. Largely dry towards Shanghai too, but then towards Hong Kong, we're back into that wet weather on and off over the next few days. And some heavy showers developing across parts of Thailand, down towards the Malay Peninsula as well. So in Tokyo, a few showers on the cards over the next couple of days. Beijing looks to be drier from Sunday onwards, and those temperatures on the up too. Across Australia, for Western Australia on Saturday, a dry day, but that cyclone waiting in the wings, it'll bring some really destructive winds and large waves later in the weekend into Monday. Heavy rain across Queensland and some really strong gusty winds for New South Wales with low pressure in the Tasman Sea. A largely dry picture for much of the weekend across New Zealand, but that low pressure will move in late Sunday and into Monday, bringing some needed rainfall to the North Island. Showers in Wellington by Monday and fairly unsettled in Sydney. Bye-bye.
It's an incredibly alluring and attractive place to go. I was really excited to visit somewhere that's so hard to get to, somewhere that so little is known about. It's absolutely crucial that we understand what is happening at Thwaites Glacier, because what happens in Antarctica is all our futures. Only 4 people had ever been there before, so it's all the more important that we get there with our cameras and show people the changes that are taking place.
So we've been filming out here for an hour and a half, and this is the result. And it gives you an idea of why it's so hard to operate here.
But there's also a story about getting to where we're going, about telling the story of what it's like to be there. It took us 5 weeks to get to the front of the glacier, and because of all the delays, what I didn't expect was to be camping on ice for 5 weeks. It has taken years of preparation to get the scientists out here. Only by taking measurements here can we hope to get accurate predictions of how sea level is going to rise in the future. This is a really important story. This is something people need to know. Every coastline in the world will be changed by what happens in that part of Antarctica. It's shocking, and, you know, we should all be upset by what's happening here. So I found it incredibly emotional to see the changes that were happening, but at the same time really reassuring to see this collective scientific effort to understand what's happening. And if we can understand it, we can do something about it.
With the support of award-winning directors and film curators from across the globe, our online film festival celebrates emerging documentary filmmakers, bringing their unique and powerful stories to life for the small screen. From short to feature-length films, they unleash their creativity and imagination. And you get the chance to choose your favourite from these hidden gems. Join us for our very first virtual film festival, Long Shots. Starts May the 28th on BBC Reel.
The coronavirus is affecting the entire United States, no matter what state you're from or your political beliefs. And during these uncertain times, we will be here to bring you the latest in all the medical analysis and on the government's efforts to reopen the country. Join us here on BBC World News.
The coronavirus epidemic has laid bare the fault lines of race and poverty and lack of access to healthcare in America. New York City is the global epicenter of that outbreak, and this part of the Bronx was already home to America's poorest. We're looking at the impact on the most vulnerable on BBC World News.
As coronavirus cases decline here in Spain, the country's hoping to restart its economy and the vital tourist industry, which brings in 10% of all Spain's income. But can Spain get tourists back on its beaches? Join me, Damien Grammaticus, here on BBC World News.
Hello, welcome to BBC News. Some other stories this hour. Iran has extended the temporary release of the British-Iranian national Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe and told her that she can remain out of prison until a decision is made on whether to grant her clemency. She had been due back in prison earlier this week, where she's been serving a sentence for plotting against the Iranian government, a charge she has always denied. An online book of remembrance to commemorate those who died from coronavirus in the UK has been organised by St Paul's Cathedral in London. Family members, friends and carers of anyone who has died can submit a name, photograph and a short message to pay tribute to them. The memorial book, called Remember Me, has received the support of the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, who said the outbreak had brought tragedy and heartbreak for so many. The Fijian capital, Suva, has been blanketed in thick smoke after a fire near the waterfront. The blaze engulfed the Suva flea market, a major tourist attraction, sending plumes of smoke into the air. The cause of the fire, which spread to an adjacent building, is still being investigated. No one is thought to have been injured. One of Italy's top tourist attractions is reopening. The Duomo in Florence is going to use technology to help visitors maintain social distancing. People will be given a device which will bleep if they get too close to other people. The director of the cathedral and the museum there says they are the first to use these devices in the world. Initially, visits to the cathedral will be free in a gesture to welcome people back. The measure is intended to help Italy's tourism industry, which has been shut since mid-March. One of West Africa's best-known musicians, Mori Kante, has died at the age of 70. His song, Yeke Yeke, became a huge hit in the late 1980s and was widely remixed. The singer and distinguished player of the kora, that's a West African harp, died in Guinea. Mr. Kante's son said his father's death was a result of untreated health problems. Much more on all the stories linked to coronavirus and the pandemic, of course, on the website bbc.com/news. Also, a lot of analysis from our correspondents around the world. As I say, bbcnews.com. Hello to our viewers in the UK now joining those around the world. It's time for us to take a look at the first editions of the national and international papers. Hello and welcome to our look ahead to what the papers will be bringing us over the next few hours. With me, the author and journalist Yasmin Alawai-Brown, and David Bond, who is the Brexit editor at the FT. Welcome to you both. Let's just look through some of the papers that we've already got in. The Daily Mirror and Guardian reporting that the Prime Minister's chief aide, Dominic Cummings, has come to the attention of police after travelling to his parents' home 250 miles away in Durham while suffering coronavirus symptoms. A source close to Mr. Cummings denies he was spoken to by officers. Well, Labour is demanding a very swift explanation for what it calls an apparent breach of lockdown rules. China acts to tighten control over Hong Kong. That's the headline in the New York Times, which says the US has indicated it will respond strongly to any crackdown by the Chinese authorities. The paper also focuses on Italians returning to their agricultural roots. Firms will be required to pay a quarter of the wages of furloughed staff under Treasury plans to unwind the state subsidy scheme. That's according to the Times. It says the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, will make an announcement on that next week. Tensions between Boris Johnson and the Chancellor reported in the FT as well. It says Treasury alarm over finances has led to Rishi Sunak pushing the PM to lift the lockdown. The paper also says that pet prices soar as pandemic loneliness sparks a serious outbreak of puppy love. The Telegraph says it has learned that the Prime Minister is to scale back Huawei's involvement in the UK's 5G network in the wake of the coronavirus crisis. The Japan Times looks at how Tokyo will attempt to reboot the city's economy while preventing a second wave of infections as the state of emergency measures are eased next week. Let's all go on a British summer holiday is the Express's headline after the Home Secretary Priti Patel announced strict quarantine measures, which the paper says could lead to a boost in UK tourism. The Sun's take on Priti Patel's announcement is don't book yet, but jet your hopes up, as the paper says. Talk of safe corridors with other countries could mean fresh hope for foreign holidays this summer. Right, let's begin. Welcome to you both. Yasmin, let's start with you. The Mirror, also a joint investigation with The Guardian about Dominic Cummings. What do you make of this? I mean, we must point out it's not our investigation, but there has been some reaction from the police force involved and indeed sources close to Boris Johnson's key aide.
Well, the thing that surprised me, I suppose, is that this was a while ago. So did people know, and did they not run the story? Why didn't we know if the police had been questioning him? There's a denial that... I think
actually that they had made requests for information about this on at least one other occasion, but hadn't got anywhere on it. So I think just to answer that question, but do continue, Yasmin.
Yeah, so I'm a bit perplexed as to why it's happening now. And if he did have the virus and he went up there, it's more serious than just breaking rules, isn't it? This is kind of incredibly irresponsible, if true, as I repeat, if true that he... And I read somewhere that the reason they've given is that both he and his wife were unwell or whatever. So one of the things is timing. And the other thing is, I have to say, I can't get too hot under the collar about this. There's so much that Dominic Cummings, an unaccountable, unelected, incredibly powerful presence in our political system, has done and got away with, and has never been answerable. He does not answer questions to select committees. So this seems to me...
Hang on a minute, Yasmin. Let's not discuss his reputation in politics or government, because that's not the issue here. This is a paper review.
No, but
so we're looking at an alleged breach of the guidelines on lockdown.
No, what I'm saying is I can't get that exercise by somebody when so much other stuff has not been covered properly.
OK, well... OK, David, what do you think of this? As I say, I mean, I think they had approached Number 10 before, but this is a joint investigation, and it appears, I mean, there's no denial by Dominic Cummings that he was in Durham, but the minutiae of the details of what's being argued about. But, you know, how does it look, just if you step back from this, do you think, in terms of the fact he was there?
Well, I think it's incredibly awkward for Boris Johnson. It's incredibly embarrassing. I mean, don't forget that just a couple of weeks ago, Neil Ferguson, you know, one of the country's leading epidemiologists and the person behind the paper that led to the UK introducing the very stringent lockdown, which it did on March the 23rd, he had to resign from the scientific advisory group to the government, SAGE, because he was found to have not been following the lockdown rules. He was visiting a girlfriend, and he had to quit his post there. And, you know, I think that this really will pose some very difficult questions for Boris Johnson. And already, you know, lots of people sharpening their knives for Dominic Cummings, clearly, you know, very, very divisive figure in government, and in the Conservative Party as well, actually already sort of quotes surfacing tonight, sort of people saying that he's been incredibly stupid in doing this, whatever the circumstances. And again, you know, we have to stress that this is the Guardian's and the Mirror's journalism here. But, you know, I think it's going to be very, very interesting to see whether Boris Johnson can hang on to him.
Yasmin, I mean, isn't that... Sorry, come on, Yasmin, you come back in.
Yeah, I think one of the things is Neil Ferguson was a scientist and not part of the machinery of the kind of power group behind Boris Johnson. I'm willing to bet a tenner that nothing will come of it.
Well, Number 10 is refusing to comment on this at the moment, Yasmin. Number 10 is refusing to comment at the moment. But David's point, and I think a lot of people, especially on social media, are saying this as well. When Ian Ferguson did resign, for example, Number 10 was very quick to say, the Prime Minister's spokesman, very quick to say this was exactly the right thing to do. And Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, said he was speechless when he heard that the quarantine lockdown had been broken.
I know. This is Dominic Cummings. And I'm saying to you that whatever was said about Neil Ferguson and whatever would be said about other figures, Dominic Cummings will not pay for this, is my prediction. He should. And I know what David has just said, that there are murmurs. He's a divisive figure, much hated by quite a lot of Tories, as much as quite a lot of people outside the power circle. But I think you will see the ultimate hypocrisy playing out here, that what they said when the scientist had to go will not be said about Cummings publicly.
In fact, people close to him, again on social media, are saying that Number 10 will fight this very hard, but I think it could take a few days to be battled out in the papers. David, let's go on to the Times. Firms must start paying a quarter of staff wages, whether or not they're still getting the full furlough scheme. This is signs that Number 11 is really saying this cannot go on indefinitely.
Yeah, and indeed, one of the big questions when Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, extended the furlough scheme into October, one of the big questions that came up was, well, how on earth, what are the companies, what are firms, what are employers going to be asked to do to contribute towards the extension of that scheme? And now, if the Times' story is right, then we now know that they're going to be asked to pay a quarter of the wages of those furloughed staff. It's worth just remembering just the sheer scale of the numbers involved here, and we saw it again reflected in the way the public finances lurched into the red in April in the new figures released earlier today. But the furlough scheme, 8 million people have now been furloughed. The cost could be as much as £80 billion, and there's been increasing noises coming from the Treasury, from Rishi Sunak, that this is going to cause immense economic damage. And so the idea that firms will now have to contribute towards some of the subsidies that they've been receiving, that workers have been receiving, shouldn't come as a great surprise. But it really is staggering, the scale of this. And just if I could mention, the FT has its own story tonight, talking about the tensions between Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak on the speed with which the lockdown is being eased. Clearly, Rishi Sunak is seeing the economic havoc that the lockdown is causing to the UK and wants to move more quickly, but Johnson is being much more cautious.
What do you make of this, Yasmin?
No, and I think that is a really interesting FT story about the emerging divide between Sunak and Johnson. I personally think until now Rishi Sunak has been on a kind of, he's had a halo around him, hasn't he? He's given everybody big sweeties, and now he's going to hold back. And there is a genuine and in some ways unresolvable argument between those who want to open up far too quickly and those who think we should be cautious because lives are at stake. I wouldn't want to be in anybody's shoes who has to make those choices. But I think it's interesting to see that Rishi is now pushing, maybe because, as David said, the figures are so alarming, and that initial generosity is going to have to be kind of pulled back a bit. And I think companies should pay a bit. I really do.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see which people, as we've seen over the last few days, have been applying for this furlough scheme, because they do, in certain circumstances, include some of the wealthiest individuals in the country. That is another issue. Let's move on to the Telegraph. PM to scale back Huawei 5G role in the wake of the virus. Big rows about this internationally, David. Big rows about this within the ruling Tory party as well for the rollout of 5G. Huawei, I think 35% of the network they were due to build, but Boris Johnson wanting to actually scale that down pretty dramatically in just, 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really fascinating turn of events here, because ever since the decision was made by Boris Johnson, it was long awaited. It all seemed to be held up over the election back in December, and then finally the decision was made that Huawei could play this sort of limited role, this ring-fence role within the new 5G telecoms networks. And now, this sort of feeling is that coronavirus and the way that China has handled the coronavirus and the amount of information it's given to the international community has led to a rethink. It's just really, really interesting, given how long it took the government to make this decision. And the intelligence agencies were saying that the risk could be mitigated around Huawei. They were confident about that. And now they seem to be rolling back. And I think what has changed is that the Conservative Party has, lots and lots of Tory MPs now are very uneasy about the UK's relationship with China. Just the other week, we saw the formation of this new China research group. Real hawks on China who think that the UK should be taking a much, much tougher line. And maybe the coronavirus has given the Conservative Party and now the government an excuse to Yasmin, do that.
This has obviously enraged Donald Trump as well.
Well, I think it's more connected to that. Liz Truss has been trying to get us a quick trade deal with the US. And I think some of this is connected to having to please Donald Trump and his cabal. And, you know, I think this is about China, the new Cold War, actually, the new Cold War, which has already started between some parts of the West and China. So it isn't entirely to do with the hawks in our Conservative Party. It's also to do with what Donald Trump wants and others want. And of course, the Hong Kong story, which we're going to be talking about, is connected to that as well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The source quoted by the Telegraph saying that he wants to sort of pull back from the involvement on China, but he still wants a relationship with China, but the Huawei deal is going to be significantly scaled back. And the paper's saying that to nothing, in fact, by 2023. Let's move on to the another FT story, but this is the Middle East edition, David, so your paper, but a different edition. Main story about China. US warns China crackdown will be the death knell for Hong Kong HK autonomy. That was the comment from Mike Pompeo, US Secretary of State. Didn't actually specify quite what the retaliatory moves would be. But I mean, the fact that this has gone to the National People's Congress, a rubber stamp really for what is in store. I mean, we could see really a resurgence, couldn't we, of all those demonstrations we saw last year?
Yeah, and I imagine that one of the calculations that Xi and the Chinese Communist Party has made is that now that perhaps they are through the coronavirus crisis, that Hong Kong, you know, you might see people coming back out onto the streets and that this protest beginning to pick up again. And so they've moved very swiftly to, you know, impose this new national security law. But, you know, going back to some of the points that Yasmin was just making there about the relationships between the relationship between China and the US and this new Cold War, you know, it is really, really a very tense moment, this, for Hong Kong. And it'll be very interesting to see how the US plays this, because Hong Kong has given some special trade exemptions different to those that they have with China. And the US may be able to withdraw those, or may choose to withdraw those.
Yeah, and Yasmin, I mean, they're bypassing the legislature there, it seems, by putting it into the basic law, which is that sort of mini constitution for the territory. And this would be basically a fait accompli.
Well, yes, but, you know, there is a problem when Hong Kong got its freedom from Britain. This system that they put in place was an interesting system. It was never going to work forever. Two systems, one nation. My really big anxiety is that whatever games the US begins to play in Hong Kong, I hope they don't generate or fund or back the kinds of rebellions that could lead to real violence from the new presence of the Chinese authorities.
Well, the paper points out, doesn't it, that during the height of those demonstrations in the summer last year, President Trump, sort of, I think the paper uses the word tepid, gave tepid backing for the pro-democracy protesters.
But now, I think for various reasons, picking a fight with China would suit the US. There are all kinds of things going on, and this, the way that China dealt with this pandemic, it has become a kind of way to legitimize this new Cold War. Yeah. And I think it's a very frightening historical moment, whichever way you look at it.
OK, let's just crack on with a few other papers here. New York Times, just briefly, David. Nice picture, beautiful picture, actually, photograph on the front of, with foreign workers now scarce because of the pandemic, more Italians are working, picking fruit and vegetables. And the paper was pointing out that it's the Italians who've gone back to the sort of the past in terms of return to the land are the ones who are having to learn the skills from migrant workers working alongside them.
Yeah, it's a lovely story, this, and as you say, a very striking picture. And of course, over the last few days, we've been used to seeing pictures coming out of Italy of people back in sort of piazzas and having meals with face masks on and gloves, but coming out of their lockdown. And here's a very different image of rural Italy. But it's, of course, a problem that a lot of European countries have, in that overseas migrant workers, you know, are not being able to travel in the same numbers that they would. I mean, the UK takes 70 to 80,000 migrant workers just to come and pick fruit and vegetables each summer, and so countries are having to look to their own workforce, their own people, to try and pick some of this food which will otherwise rot in the field.
Yeah.
So I think there is a sort of genuine economic
and Italy, Yasmin, like Spain, like France, like so much of Europe, reliant on tourism. 15-20% of GDP, I think, in Spain, isn't it? Is from tourism. And the Sunsplash, don't book yet, but jet your hopes up. This is from the press conference at Number 10 with Priti Patel, Home Secretary. Fresh hopes, they say, emerged last night. Safe corridors. Not a lot of detail about that, though.
No, and I just don't know how it's going to work. If you're going to quarantine people who are coming here, and then there is going to be tit for tat. I think France has said today, that they'll come start the same process. How are they going to do this? I think we have to kind of give up on the idea of foreign holidays for a year, because it's going to be inside a plane. You cannot guarantee any kind of distancing. I'd be very reluctant, for the sake of a holiday, to get into, especially a low-cost airline. So I feel for those industries, but I think it's probably
but not an expensive one, Yasmin.
Oh no! If I got a private jet sent to me to go to a private island, if Richard Branson would do that, I'll go.
OK, well, actually, Branson might take you up on that one, I think. David, the same story in the Express. Let's all go on a British summer holiday for our viewers around the world watching on BBC World. That's reference to a Cliff Richard song back in the, goodness, 50s or 60s. But, yes, I mean, I suppose that would give a boost to the British holiday tourism industry, David. But it's going to be, that could be really several weeks, months ahead as well, couldn't it?
Well, that's right. We still don't know exactly what, whether we will be able to do that in the UK, whether the measures will be lifted sufficiently to allow that. But already, campsites, I read earlier in the week, they're already sort of seeing an increase in bookings. I think, people are already trying to plan ahead in case they are able to get away for a break and get away from their own homes in August or maybe early September.
Yeah, and Yasmin, just a quick comment from you just at the end about the quarantine rules as announced today.
Well, we'll wait and see. I think they're quite strict. That this is for people coming in, and fines for them. And I mean, again, this is a horrible situation internationally. How do you deal with keeping the economy sort of at least ticking over, and keeping people safe?
Yeah,
are we going to test everybody who's coming in?
Much of Europe is actually easing lockdown, and a little confusing, it seemed today anyway, about what people could do in terms of getting public transport into the place where they're going to be isolating for a fortnight. We can discuss all of that in much more detail in about an hour's time, but thank you both very much, Yasmin and David, for now. And that is our look at the first editions of the papers.